we're done.
On Wednesday at around 5 p.m. Eastern, Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson and a number of public health officials talked to reporters about the response to terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. Their comments are about a half hour.
Ladies and gentlemen, first let me introduce the people that are with me. Art Lawrence here is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Health and is Admiral in the Medical Corps. And next to, we have Jim Hughes over here, who is from CDC, and Mac Lumpkin from FDA is over here, who's a doctor, and Bob Knaus, who cannot be with us but is heading up our Office of Emergency Preparedness. We have Dr. Howard Zucker here, who used to practice medicine in New York and is on leave to be a presidential scholar for a year and assigned to the department. And of course, Claude Allen, who's the Deputy Secretary, has been doing a lot of the work coordinating all of the resources we have in the department. I'd like to just thank all of you first for joining us here today during this very difficult period for the people of America. I'd like to update you on what the Department of Health and Human Services is doing to assist New York and the Washington, D.C. metropolitan areas in the wake of yesterday's terrorist attacks. We have a long ways to go, but we have begun the healing process in America by acting quickly and aggressively to help those in need. We began preparing when the first reports came in from New York, and we mobilized as soon as state and local officials let us know what they needed. That is our role, to help state and local governments in any way possible. The Department of Health and Human Services medical personnel and support staff are on the ground helping to provide the initial care as we cope with this tragedy. Now let me detail what precisely we are doing. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services began readying items and teams and resources to send to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. We have worked closely with officials at all levels from the start. I have spoken several times with Governor Pataki, Governors Gilmore, and Mayor Giuliani, and have vowed to offer whatever assistance that they need. They know more resources are only a phone call away. Our Office of Emergency Preparedness has deployed 328 medical personnel from disaster readiness teams to Washington, D.C. and New York areas. The Office of Emergency Preparedness also has deployed about 300 mortuary services personnel. These men and women are part of the 5 disaster medical teams sent to New York City and 3 to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians, all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. And we just got notified that they want us to set up one to help handle the airplane crash in Pennsylvania. We're also in the process of shipping literally tons of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help from the Centers for Disease Control. This shipment includes 84,000 bags of intravenous fluid, 400 ventilators, pharmaceuticals, emergency medication, and bandages and dressings. We've also activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We've inventoried their specialties, and we're allowing any of those individuals to go up and assist and be able to help replace the medical personnel in New York. We also are giving backup assistance to the hospital ship Comfort from the United States Navy. And working with America's blood banks, we have acted swiftly to ensure the quantity and the quality of the blood supply in New York and the Washington area. Within moments of the first attack, I directed the National Institutes of Health to open its blood bank and stay open as long as needed. The response has been overwhelming, as it has been at blood banks nationwide. By noon today, Wednesday, The blood drive was forced to close because NIH had collected all the blood that they can store. Heavy turnout has been reported by the American Red Cross and at blood banks elsewhere in this country. That speaks to the unmatched generosity of the American spirit. The need for blood will be ongoing. However, I will issue bulletins about blood needs as they change. In particular, special needs remain for donors with type O and Rh negative blood types. We still need that type. Please make an appointment to give blood. If not this week, then next week, so we can maintain a high blood supply in the coming weeks and months. You can contact the American Red Cross at 1-800-448-3543 and America's Blood Centers at 888-BLOOD-88. There have been concerns that there is not enough skin available for skin grafts for burn victims. State and local health officials have told us that so far there's an adequate supply for patients. We have acted to put tissue banks on notice to help out if more skin is needed in the future. Questions have also been raised about the safety of the blood supply in this time of high demand. Let me assure you and all Americans that America's blood supply remains safe. The FDA is working diligently to ensure a strong and quality blood supply in this time of vital need. I would like to assure everyone, to our knowledge, no untested blood has been released to the public. Additionally, there have been questions raised concerning health risks posed by bodies which are buried in the rubble of the buildings, and this is a valid concern. HHS, led by the Centers for Disease Control, is working with state and local officials to protect from water and airborne health risks. CDC has a team on the ground taking air, dust, and water samples, and this is of utmost concern to health officials. Also, disaster mortuary operational response teams will ensure that the process of removing bodies is conducted as safely as possible and identifications occur as efficiently as possible. The heavy dust that has coated Lower Manhattan following the attack also poses respiratory risk, particularly to our children and elderly citizens. We are well aware that New York has one of the highest childhood asthma rates in the nation, and CDC officials are working with New York authorities to conduct tests and protect our vulnerable residents from high level of dust in the air. Another concern resulting from the attacks is the threat of tetanus and remains to the buildings. We have acted swiftly to ensure that adequate amounts of tetanus vaccine has been made available. We have supplied the vaccine to health officials both here and in New York, who say that adequate supplies are now on hand, including 50,000 doses in New York City alone. And there is ample supply that can be sent if more is needed. Also, we've reworked the department's main website, www.hhs.gov, to include contact information for blood donations, as well as other information on how to get help or assistance related to this crisis. The site also has the latest information about our efforts to assist in the aftermath of this horrible event. We expect to update the website regularly to provide timely and useful information to the public. I would like to thank all of the millions of Americans and the organizations across the country who have offered their support, including the American Hospital Association and the American Medical Association, which we have heard from, which has more than 1,000 doctors across America willing to volunteer. And the National Medical Association has developed a rapid response team to assist in the crisis, as well as drug companies and medical supplies companies have been also extremely generous, calling in, offering supplies, drugs, and whatever we need at cost or given to us free. Finally, we also are assisting if grief becomes too much to bear. Our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration has set up a hotline, 789-2467 to help those who need to talk make it through the tough spots. Make no mistake about it. We will get through this, as I mentioned earlier. We've already begun the healing process. We are Americans, and we will preserve and persevere. Last night, the President reminded us that, and I quote, "All Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace." And he said, "We will all go forward to defend freedom and in all that is good and just in our world." Pursuing all that is good and just, that's the mission of HHS, and we will accept nothing less. I thank you very much for coming. Now I would like to introduce Claude Allen, the Deputy Secretary, for some comments, and then Art Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just very briefly, the Secretary has covered all the issues that we are working on here in the department and on the ground. Just to let you know that we are working, we have a number of HHS employees in the regional office in New York, and we're working with New York officials to get that office back opened up later this week, and there will be a further announcement about that. We will be working here around the clock, working to keep the Secretary and the President advised of all activities involving health and human service issues in the area. And the Secretary has given you our website address and numbers, and we will continue to work with you on those issues as necessary. And I will just wait and address any other questions that may come at the end.
Just a short note that in addition to the immediate problems that the department has been addressing and that the Secretary has made decisions on, there are continuing concerns about health and safety, not only in the particular locations, but also in the city of New York as the result of the dust columns, as the Secretary has mentioned. I want to assure everyone in the state of New York, city of New York, and any other American who might ever be in this situation, that the Public Health Service, the Department of Health and Human Services, is behind the population for the long haul. So we are viewing this not as a 1, 2, or 3 week process, but as a longer term process by which we not only monitor, but also provide direct health services.
Jim Hughes from CDC. Make a couple remarks, and then Mac Lumpkin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. By the end of the day today, CDC will have 17 personnel in the New York City area working with colleagues from other parts of HHS and from New York City to do basically 2 different types of activities. One, to assist in the deployment of the medical supplies, the intravenous fluids, the administration sets, the personal protective equipment that Secretary Thompson mentioned. In addition, others will be working with colleagues in the New York City Health Department and hospitals throughout the city to establish surveillance for adverse health outcomes. We think that at this time, very careful vigilance in terms of public health surveillance to monitor disease patterns, trends, and to identify any unusual clusters of illness in a timely manner is absolutely paramount. Thank you.
Mac?
Good afternoon. As the Secretary pointed out, there are several areas where FDA is involved, both in the acute situation here and, as has been pointed out, over the long haul. I think in the acute situation, our major concerns have been on the blood supply, the adequacy of the blood supply, and the quality of the blood supply to meet the very acute situation that existed yesterday and to meet the longer-term needs as we go forward. I think, as the Secretary pointed out, we are clearly trying to send a message to Americans that the need for blood was not only an acute need, but it's going to be a need that we need to follow over the next period of time. And as the Secretary said, we'll be working with our colleagues here in the department to make sure Americans know how this need evolves over the next several weeks to months. The other areas that we've been involved in include the procurement of tissues such as skin for the skin grafts, and also dealing with the various pharmaceutical companies and other medical product companies to try to assure that we have adequate supplies of quality materials to get to New York and Washington and other areas as they're needed, and also make sure that we have adequate supplies for the rest of the country as we're getting through this very special time in the Northeast and here in the D.C. area. Thank you.
Dr. Howard, you would like to say?
All I would just mention is that as one who's practiced medicine up in New York, I just have the utmost confidence of the doctors and the nurses and the healthcare professionals up there in taking care of the patients who come into the hospitals, and also of all the emergency medical technicians and fire and rescue people in the city. And I think they'll do a superb job. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. Yeah.
Chris with the Associated Press. You know, people are trying to make real decisions about giving blood and things like that right now. What is the department's message on giving blood tonight or tomorrow morning? If you do not have the types that you specified, should you not give blood until a few days have passed?
Well, what we'd like to have you do is we'd like to have you make an appointment with your blood centers and make an appointment next week or the week after. We have enough right now. But as Mac has said, this is going to be an ongoing effort, and we're going to need blood supply, a constant blood supply, for several weeks, and we would appreciate it be spread out a little bit, and unless you have O negative or RH negative.
Chris Joyce at National Public Radio. Who's in charge of collecting ante-mortem information about the missing from the families, and also is anybody coordinating the collection of DNA samples from families, since many of these identifications are likely to have to be from DNA?
We'll be doing some of that, but a lot of that will have to be done at the local levels, in the local city and the rescue workers. The DNA samples will be taken from individuals and family members, and will be worked on through our 4 mortuary control groups that we have up in New York, as well as in some of the places that the city of New York has.
This disaster sort of pointed up the role that trauma care plays in national defense, and I was wondering if the department is going to take a long-term look at the adequacy of trauma care in the U.S. and places where it could be strengthened, and if so, do you have any thoughts on where it needs to be strengthened?
Not at this point, but not at this point about where it needs to be improved. I can tell you that we are taking a look at all examples and instances of medical delivery. The medical delivery system in America needs to be improved, and we certainly are looking at the one in trauma as well as many other areas. So it's not that isolated as you've indicated. We're taking a look at the whole panoply of medical delivery in America.
Will this accelerate such activity?
It certainly brings it front and center. More people will be concerned about it now. Yes.
What type of actions are you taking, or did you take yesterday? This might be a question for the CDC, to prepare for some kind of bioterrorism that might have followed in the wake of what happened yesterday?
Excuse me. We have set up a bioterrorism group, and I have put Dr. Scott Lillibridge from CDC in charge of that. We've hired some consultants. We've got several people within the department working on it, and we think that we are in very good shape. We were concerned when the planes hit some of the targets yesterday. We were very concerned about CDC. We increased the enforcement and the security perimeters at CDC considerably yesterday. And we made that a decision. I made that decision, and we called in and got a lot of help from the state of Georgia, just because CDC is a target, and we wanted to make sure that it was protected.
Sure.
Scott Lillibridge, is he captain of the medical department? Yes. He's a captain, and Scott Lillibridge is in charge of that.
For the bioterrorism unit,
Yes.
And this is new as of yesterday?
Oh, no, we've been working on this for some time. I appointed Scott, I think it was about 2 months ago. Yes.
Cheryl Stolberg from the New York Times. Along those lines, it's my understanding that the CDC issued an alert to state and local health departments saying disease
We wanted to make
patterns.
sure that there was any outbreaks, any kinds of examples of diseases or infections whatsoever, that we would be alerted to it immediately. And
Have you been alerted to anything so far?
no, we have not.
And
We check on a very regular basis. Did you want to answer a little bit more, Jim?
Well, I can make a couple of other comments. I alluded in my earlier comments to the fact that vigilance is critically important at this time. So we did notify state and local health departments throughout the country in the aftermath of yesterday morning's episodes that they should heighten vigilance and fully utilize the resources that have been put in place over the past 2.5 years to monitor for any unusual clusters of illness.
And then beyond that, could you elaborate a little bit on what disease risks the bodies might pose? What are you looking for?
Well, first and foremost, it's important that the rescue workers, as they come into contact with blood or body fluids, that they appropriately protect themselves. Frankly, that's probably the major risk. I don't think that it's likely that there'll be any outbreaks of infectious disease related to recovery efforts. But again, it's another one of the reasons that we emphasize the need for vigilance in the local area.
Secretary Thompson. Some issues have been raised about the possibility of asbestos being released during the collapses. I imagine the air testing that's going on will take that into consideration?
Absolutely. It's one of the most important things that they can be doing, and that's why CDC has so many individuals up there monitoring the air and the water.
And if that does turn out to be a concern, what actions can be taken to mitigate it?
Well, it's going to be, we've got plans in place to bring other experts up there and to remediate it.
Mr. Secretary, the medical emergency response teams that have been dispatched here in Virginia and in New York so far, can you give us a sense how close to their capacity they're functioning right now? Of course, a lot of people, it seems that the biggest work is yet to come in New York.
Yes,
and how close to capacity are those teams functioning? How much more will they be able to do before they're overwhelmed?
Sure. And talking with our teams that are on the ground that are prepared to be deployed in New York, we have one DMATS team that has been actually deployed. We have two that are stationed at Fort Stewart, ready to be deployed, and then two in reserve. Right now, New York has the lead in many of these areas and have not requested additional assistance at this time. But as you pointed out, as we move along with moving beyond the rescue and recovery effort, there will be additional requests made and needs identified, and we are prepared to provide those assistance to the officials both in state and city of New York.
Can you give us a sense of the teams that are on hand, maybe how close to their capacity they function at 50% or?
And many of them, for example, our DMORT teams, which are our mortuary teams, as of this afternoon, we have not received any remains to be identified or to work with. Much of that is already being handled by the city and state of New York. They're utilizing existing capacity. We are serving in a capacity of reserve to assist them as needed. So we have not been called on in that capacity as yet, but we anticipate there will be a further call as we move further down.
A couple more questions.
You mentioned that you're on the ground out here in New York. Do you have any updated, death toll count or survivors that have been pulled from any of the wreckages?
That will have to come out of New York. I plan to go to New York tomorrow, and I'm going to meet with the mayor and the medical examining officer and offer everything that they need. We're going to make sure that it's fulfilled.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us a little bit more about the department's stockpile of drugs and supplies, some of which were sent to New York? How much does the department have? Where do you keep these supplies? Can you give us some more information about that?
Lots of supplies, but they're kept in different locations, and CDC is pretty much in charge of that. Jim, did you want to elaborate?
Well, there are 8 pushbacks, so-called, around the country in strategic sites. One of those was sent to New York City yesterday. In addition, we utilize a second-tier approach called the vendor-managed inventory that allows us to call on tailor-made caches of supplies depending on the nature of the incident. And some of those have been mobilized as well. That's where the IV fluids and the IV administration sets and the ventilators and all have come from.
Can you give us some examples of drugs that are kept in those?
Well, there are a number of antibiotics that are kept in there. Actually, this is the first time that the National Pharmaceutical Stockpile has been deployed, and Secretary Thompson made the decision to do that yesterday. The stockpile was created in large part because of the concern about the threat of bioterrorism, which obviously this is not. But because of that concern, it contains a number of antibiotics, which will probably not be needed in this case. So they're in the New York City area, but they're not actually being sent to hospitals.
One final question.
The pushbacks, the pharmaceutical supplies that included, of course, some months ago there was concern about the quality of the drugs contained in the national pharmaceutical emergency supplies. Some of them were stored in excessive heat. Now that they're being used, do you have confidence that the drugs are functional and of high enough quality that they'll do the job?
We're very, very confident.
So they're doing.
Yeah. I declared yesterday a public health emergency throughout the department, so it allows me to bring as many resources to bear as needed, and we will do that. Yes?
Just along those lines, you said the antibiotics will probably not be needed. Can you talk about what will be needed and what is being used out of that stockpile?
The IVs.
Yeah, principally at this point, the IV fluids, the administration sets, the ambu bags, the ventilators, dressings, which are part of it as well. Those are the principal things right now.
Does it look like you'll need to send more, or is this enough?
Well, it's enough for now. We are certainly prepared to send more if we need to. But the current needs, I should emphasize, appear to be well met.
Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.
Earlier in the day, First Lady Laura Bush visited survivors of the attack on the Pentagon and aid workers at Walter Reed Army